Hi, I'm Felecia Caton Garcia, and I write poetry and some fiction, and I'm going to read a little bit of both. Now, this first poem that I'm going to read is in elegy for my cousin who passed away last summer in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And he was my little cousin, 40 years old, but younger than me, and so he will always be the little cousin. And it was a very strange death for many reasons, not least of all the inability to mourn together with family because of the COVID restrictions. And so for the first time in a very long time, I found myself returning to poetry in order to try to find some shape for that grief. And that's where this poem comes from. Elegy for John. 1. Listening to my dog's dream is probably my favorite thing. Is the last thing you wrote to me or anyone. I smiled to read it. I wanted to reply, but I was afraid you would call me and I would have to decide to answer. Answering meant hours listening to you stumble down sidewalks, vomit in alleys, love and fight me, intelligible and not in turns. It ruins me, I told my friends and family, selfishly thinking of you in ruins, the scaffold of empty bottles glinting under streetlights. Not answering meant wrapping guilt around my shoulders like a pelt. I didn't answer. You'll never know I read your words at all. 2. Unbearable, the way we all wanted to save you, the way we offered our homes, our money, our best intentions. So much expectation, so many roads to hell. But how we wanted you to walk just once down that road. We had nothing you could use. 3. Tell me, is there any fairy tale that couldn't be undone by the presence of a dog like the one who sits beside me when I can't stand, wolf muzzle and white teeth, the one who sleeps in the snow if I let him? Imagine his thick ruff clutched in the hand of Little Red. Imagine his nails clicking across the stone palace floors toward the godmother with hate in her heart. Hear him howl to keep the children to the path. Smell the rending flesh of the huntsman before he steps too far into the forest. 4. Your dogs must have known you were dying. They must have smelled your lungs and liver, the blood you vomited into empty glasses surrounding your bed. And when you seized the last time, feet and fists knocking aside everything, you were not alone, and they stayed until we found you. I'm trying to imagine what it was like for them to lie beside your cooling body. 5. I think by the end, their love was the only love you could endure. Unquestioning, uncomplicated, relentless. They didn't even mind the fleas you must have shared with them in the basement you died in. Fleas, after all, being one of the things that happen in the life of a dog. Not a human failing, but expected, like hunger and rabbits and dusk. 6. Tell me that heaven is a pack of dogs running through fields. Tell me that your 2 human legs flash in the muddle of fur. Tell me you lie down in the communal pile at night, tongue, tooth, and tail. Tell me your dream is the sound of dogs dreaming. This next poem that I'm going to read is called Forlorn, and it begins with an epigraph. The entry for forlorn in the online etymology dictionary. In English, now often in forlorn hope, and the sense of the whole phrase is of a suicide mission. The phrase, more often than not, is used in English as if it meant a faint hope, and the misuse has colored the meaning of forlorn. I thought it was love when you put your lips against my ear and said, count to 10, then I'll find you. It surprises no one I thought this was love. I think everything is love, or that it wasn't. It always makes sense at first to buy attention with the currency of secrets. So I told you about the high branches of the pine, the crawl space in the bales of hay, the hotel room in the center of town. When the governor tells us to shelter in place, you tell me sometimes things just end. And there's nowhere to hide. The bars are all closed. The doors of all my friends are closed. The lights are shutting off across the city. 1, I say, eyes shut tight. It's a trick cruel children sometimes play. Hide and go seek, they say, to the youngest or the awkward child. You count, they say, to the one who doesn't. Then they drift away. How long does that child hide? The longest I ever hid was 7 years. 2. Ready or not, I'm digging tunnels in the floor of my home. Nothing ever ends. Someone just leaves. But for the child standing alone in the yard, eyelids pressed together so tightly it hurts, everyone is still just out of sight, waiting for her. She doesn't know she's alone. She doesn't know there is no one to find. She doesn't want to let anyone down. 3, she whispers, and the light around her begins to fade. The night birds rise and shine. She shivers, arms tight around herself. 4. Like many writers currently, I have also been thinking a lot about various kinds of apocalypses, big ones, and then the ones that we live through all of the time, every day. And I started a series of poems about the end times, and this one is called "The Day the Sundials Failed." And it is specifically a poem that's addressing climate change. We were all sleeping outside by then, sprawled naked on beds of dried leaves or piled on top of one another in caves and crevices in the stone. No one was old. The children were gone. We weren't certain where. Maybe they had all died. Maybe we heard them stepping through the ash and bracken early in the morning, single file and close. They were better off without us. We were worse for wear. The smell of fire was the smell of flesh. We had no reason to keep the time except to keep the time. We kept the time. Anywhere 2 or more of us bedded down, we built a shadow clock if one wasn't already there. Steel, stone, stick, and stray bone, gnomon in sand or ash. Our burnt eyes squinted against the smoke to mark and mark again. The faintest, lightest shadow was discerned, determined, but on that day, the sun rose darkest after dawn, and shadows were the very air. That was how we knew what time it was. And the last thing that I'll read is an excerpt from a novel, Perpetually in Progress. It is a novel, the title of the novel is Petrichor, and it follows the stories of 3 characters whose lives are very intertwined. And it's about a lot of things. It's about betrayal, and it's about the domestic spying on Muslim communities after 9/11, and it is about borders, and it's about transgression, and it's about love. And each of the 3 characters occupies a different place in relation to time. One of the characters, Sebastian or Seba, is telling the story of what's happened from the future. He's looking back and knows everything that has gone on before. The character of Khaled is outside of time. So he moves through it, present, past, and future somewhat fluidly. And one character's story is being unveiled only in the present moment. Step by step, we walk along with her through the story. And this particular section of the story is called Theft. It's broken into many small sort of episodic sections. And this is one of the sections of Lena, the character who's in the present always. We're always caught in that present with her. And she's a translator, and she's writing about, or I'm sorry, she's in the moment of working on a translation. There are far fewer translations published in the United States than any other nation designated developed. Lena thinks this fact, as much as anything else, is the best evidence that her country is headed for cultural death. American exceptionalism has prevented the incorporation of other perspectives, other ideas, other ways of being in the world. Lena has watched over the past 20 years as America has exported its sense of self and refused all imports that might unsettle its sense of originality and isolation. Late in his life, Lena's grandfather had become terrified of mirrors. It was one of the final stages of his dementia. In the end, all reflective surfaces became suspect and dangerous. He ate off plastic plates with plastic forks. Lena has wondered what it was he had begun to see there, wondered if her grandfather had feared that his reflection might steal something precious from him. A truth about himself, an illusion, she will never know. But she sees his dementia in literary America. Lena hates the phrase lost in translation because she thinks it reinforces the idea that loss is the end result of translation, when it is the place where she has found everything worth loving, including herself, herselves. Lena often feels as if she has spent her entire life in obsessive self-reflection. It's not clear to her where this reflection goes from being useful to being narcissistic. Every time she translates a poem, a line, even a single word, she unveils something of herself, her way of thinking and understanding the world. She has often thought that what Sebastian has called mysterious in her is nothing more than absence. Nothing at all where self should be, just an empty menagerie of meticulously landscaped enclosures, the zebras, leopards, and peacocks long since escaped, living in some abandoned orchard outside of town, while she, meticulous groundskeeper, keeps the paths swept and the vegetation lush. Lena works hard not to be the glass pane separating the spectator from the art. She doesn't want to add to the lie that translating a work is a way of simply pulling back a curtain on a set piece. Her work is to somehow recreate the coming into being of the original poem without meddling so much that the poem would not recognize itself in a mirror. On more than one occasion, in the middle of a long and important work of translation, she has had a dizzying moment of confusion. Walking across the street, nursing her infant daughter, having sex with her husband, and she is no longer certain if she is the author of the work, or someone else entirely. She has in these moments no recollection of her name, her history, her purpose. The first time this happened in graduate school, it terrified her. She made an appointment with a psychiatrist, then failed to go. She considered dropping out, then did not. Eventually, she came to accept it, if not understand it. She read theorists on the art and craft of translation. They all seemed as confused as she was. She learned that the scholarship of translation means learning how to articulate the not knowing of language particularly well. And she sallied forth, conquered and conqueror, acted upon and actor, unveiled and unveiler. Some harrowing channel between all of those, where the pen in the hand becomes a spear, becomes a feather, becomes flight. But for all her romantic imaginings, Lena knew that translation was an exercise of power, but it has never been so clear to her as it is now. She has never approached her work with such a strong sense of necessity and doubt, and it has bled into everything, her mothering, her marriage, the hours she spends with Khalid. Now she looks at the text in front of her in a language she doesn't understand as well as she wants, and writes argentum, aviary, aliment, ancillary. Your red feathers on a black bird, blind mice orchestrating fields of violins. I said blind, I said fields, I said everything you wanted to hear. Later, when she returns to the stanza, she will find that the original poem contained no words for birds, mice, or fields. She will not know why she wrote any of it at all, but that hasn't happened yet, and Lena cannot live in the future. Of the three of them, she is the only one anchored in the present. So she continues, cloud, cannon, cataclysm, caliph, you are inevitable. I call on old prayers. I am everything I was meant to be, and you.